Good morning. I want to thank everybody who joins us. My name is Olga Tavanova, and today we gathered a panel discussion we called Gender Policy and War to talk about the risks, to talk about the challenges, and to talk about achievements during the war. It's year 9 of the war, almost full 9 years of the war, and almost 1 full year of the full-scale invasion of the Russian aggressor in our country. We'll talk about these matters today. I want to introduce our speakers today. They are Kateryna Levchenko, Government Commissioner for Gender Policy, Nadia Hrany. She's the current servicewoman, a participant of the veteran movement, Oksana Hryhoryeva, gender advisor to the commander of the ground forces of Ukrainian armed forces, Alyona Gruzina, Culturologist, international manager at Gender in Detail, Olesia Bondar, the director of Ukrainian Women's Fund, and Hanna, Hrytsenko, researcher of the Invisible Battalion project of the Institute of Gender Programs. So thanks for joining us. Let's talk about what's going on with the gender policies in our country. What were the changes that were affected since the beginning of the full-scale invasion? What are the problems we're facing? And I hope we are not only having problems, but some achievements too. Thank you for your question. This year is the year of the full-scale invasion of Russia. Has shown that the matter of women and gender equality is still in the area of high politics. They were not set aside as some matters which wouldn't have been urgent today. First of all, we have to say that there are thousands of women, of girls who defend our homeland with their arms, with the weapons in their hands, which we appreciate a lot. This is the unique type of people. They are unique women who took up the arms just like the men, who risked to sacrifice their lives, and they defend our homeland in the front lines. We may call the figures more than 50,000 in the armed forces, tens of thousands in the National Guard, State Border Guard Service of Ukraine, and National Police, and those numbers are growing, which clearly indicates that the women are active defenders, active subjects. It's very important because very frequently in such, so to say, military context, military discourse, the women are regarded as the victims, as affected parties, and the war influences proportionally on women, on the families. But in Ukraine today we're creating the new model which shows that the women are not the affected parties, but they are active defenders, they're active fighters for their freedom of Ukraine. This social trend is being supported by the government, and the evidence of it are the adopted documents, because the policies are being approved in the plans, strategies, and resolutions of the government. In the end of December, the National Plan 1325, Women and Security, was approved, which is the important instrument for ensuring women's participation in the projects of defense of the country, organization of work in response to the challenges we're having. And that plan was written together with the social organizations, civil organizations, Women's Foundation, Ukrainian Veterans Movement, and the network of advisors for gender policies. So it says that the policies are being built by the government with the society, in cooperation with the society, civil society. Last year, the state strategy for ensuring the equality of rights of men and women was approved by the government, which demonstrates the importance of the matters of gender equality in all spheres of social life. Well, and the war proves it since 2014 that the gender policies cannot be reduced to social policies only. Those are the policies that should be implemented in all political areas, and the level of implementation does not only depend on the level of education of government officials, and our cooperation with the State Commissioner and Vice Prime Minister for European integration and the Office of Vice Prime Minister are very good demonstrative examples of such cooperation. However, there are problematic issues as well. The subjects of women's rights and human rights in general is still in the sphere of manipulative explanations, and there are manipulations about the women's rights, and one of such manipulations was the draft law which offers to rename the Day of the Defender, both men and women, only for the male gender, and to cancel the holiday of International Women's Day. Those are very dangerous manipulations, and I think that the veterans movement and other civil organizations should react very actively, because the active policy of decommunization and elimination the Soviet past from the world, we have to clearly articulate our vision, our goals for the future, and rely on the verified facts, verified information. And this is why the war continues not only in the battlefields, it continues not only in the cities, it continues in the minds. It's the war of consciousness. And Ukrainian women's movement have to play a very important role in this fight. I am ready to answer any questions if there are any. Ms. Oksana, Ms. Nadia, question will probably be to you. The war is not a woman's business, but I want to hope that you don't hear anything like this, any wordings like this anymore. But I would like to ask how the structure and the approach has changed within our armed forces since the beginning of the war for this time of the full-scale invasion. Do you experience those changes? Are there still problems that are not yet solved in the armed forces? I mean, in terms of the gender matters. Thank you for your questions. I will start, and Ms. Nadia will probably continue. Well, the war in Ukrainian is a female gender, and woman in the army is quite a normal thing from the point of view of today's challenges, and there is nothing special and impossible about that. It's a topic that again is in the plane of manipulations. I want to say that women were always in the army, and if we dig deeper, so back in the history in Ukraine resurgence army, there were women in top ranks, in high positions. However, the Soviet system just reduced the role of the woman in the armed forces. They were just the addition to the men in the army. And even making a parallel with what Ms. Levchenko just mentioned, yesterday I was shocked by those manipulations. There are people in the front lines, and someone resorts to manipulation at this very time. So the defenders, both men and women, are in equal conditions. The women's deed, the fact that they went to the front lines, that was a tectonic move that happened in 2014 when Russia started attacking Ukraine. The number of women in the army started growing, and the women who were in the army back then, who had inspiration, who had experience, they were appointed to the positions of the cookers or some office positions. Meanwhile, they were fulfilling the duties of a sniper, for example, and that was unfair. And thanks to Miss Kateryna, she's the locomotive of gender policy, and that tectonic move happened everywhere, including the sector of defense. And back in 2018, when all the legislative acts were integrated into the military legislation, the women started occupy all the positions for which would envisage combat duties, and the same is with the military educational institutions. The girls were allowed to enter any specialty courses. It's important for the women not only to be in the army at some position, but they have to be properly trained. It was always considered to be a men's thing. So women had inspiration to go to join the military, and they may not have been properly physically trained. They may not maintain the same shape, and to prepare the officer some time is required, and it's very important that the educational institutions were allowed to train girls as well. So now in 2023 we will have the graduates who will be able to take the top level commissioned officer positions in the armed forces, and we will probably see women in the ranks of general on the top level, in the top level military command. So we're moving in a very tall steps where these policies are supported by the top level military command. The commander of the ground forces fully supports this gender policy. The women are being allowed to join any training courses, any qualification upgrades. And as to the 8th of March, me as a woman, I'm outraged by the fact that it's not about the holiday. I understand the haters who say it's a Soviet remnant because the Soviet system distorted the image of this holiday. It was imposed, the opinion was imposed that the women is the addition to the men. We don't have to cut it. We have to renew what the world celebrates. It was not so long ago when the women were given the right to vote. For example, I'm not a feminist, but I want to thank all the feminists for the fact that we have this right now and that we can talk about it today. So those stupidities will not be passed on the legislative level because there are many people's deputies who are taking care of this subject. Well, yeah, distortion of senses was one of the components, important components of the Soviet system. So we have to renew those senses, not to change something. Nadia, please. Thank you for this opportunity to express myself today. I would like to say that the 8th of March is just another pain for me because I was held in the position of the advisor to the commander of the special operations for less than 1 year because they have a layer of Soviet perception of the world which cannot be penetrated. And 8th of March for me is like a Halloween. It was not that holiday which was called the holiday of the horrors. My command was chasing me with an orchid for 2 days. They didn't make it, so the orchid is still in the office, and they pour coffee in the vase. So this is like we have the image of Ficus women. The National Guard celebrated the 8th of March when the women were peeling potatoes, or they were competing in peeling the potatoes, whoever does it faster. Well, we say we have some challenges, we have some moves, we grow. For me as a military, it all can be put in the box. Our thinking is a little bit distorted. How do we measure the progress of any efficient system, uh, any progress? So in NATO, there is a matrix MLPFI. Every word means something. It's an acronym which means some big layer of work, like D doctrine, S structure, and so on and so forth. So we've talked about the doctrine, and it's the element which changed most and is the biggest achievement. I'm telling you as a person who wanted to join back in 2017, and at the conscription office they told me goodbye. And I went to the front lines even before I was officially enlisted, and there was a minute of black irony that the conscription office refused all the, not only me, but all the women. They sent the draft notice to the rapers who were spiking women's drinks. So that's really an irony. What changed in terms of NATO metrics in the army was doctrine. And it's important because back in 2017 there was no order on the equal positions. I started as the signal operator. I was a radio operator. I just signed the paper, and it changed later. Fortunately, now a woman can come to a conscription office. That they don't have to prove anybody that they would make it. When you come there with your haircut, the officers ask less stupid questions, but there are still a lot of items which remain back there. We don't have, for example, gynecologists or gynecological surgery chambers. And the person who was staying for 8 months in the Donetsk region, for example, the doctors are not so friendly, and they start telling you, like, if you wanna shoot at each other, can't you do it in the field? Why do you do it in the cities? So we cannot fully rely on the civil medical system. There are no proper gynecological medicines. There's no proper assistance for the pregnancy, and let alone the bearing. The program of free birth for women veterans was implemented just recently, and you can work with some brigade, and if you want to work with some specific team for the birth procedure when they deliver a child, you have to pay them actually, and thanks to the volunteers, they keep helping us in this field. They understand all the problems that can happen to both men and women. They all have some specific problems. Well, men have their specific problems and women have their specific problems, but the men's problems are known for longer. And if volunteers have some hygienic measures, the hygienic devices they can offer to the military women, they everybody is happy, or they can go for miles and miles to find a pharmacy to buy it. And I don't know if I'm doing it right, that talking about the health problems with for the women, because it's still a huge problem in the armed forces, the absence of medicines, the absence of proper medical infrastructure, and the mandatory gynecological examination is a shame, actually, because you're being looked at as a woman who joined the armed forces with the only goal to get pregnant and to live, or to find a man, to find a husband. There is no logic in it, but the medical commission looks at you in this very specific way. You are being asked if you have passed the gynecological examination, and you're being asked questions whether you have children, why do you have one child, why don't you have two children, and so on and so forth. So unfortunately, there is no women's uniform, field uniform, and the one available is it's still Soviet era, and it's not fit for wearing, actually. I would like to see those officials who may march wearing that women's uniform. The field uniform was not developed even for the women. No summer uniform, no winter uniform. Only thanks to the efforts of the volunteers, we already developed a number of models. And I visited the veterans headquarters yesterday, and I've seen those uniforms which were designed for the women, and hallelujah, I said. So I'm not even talking about the personal body armor. I'm only talking about field uniform. But for example, as a woman who injured the knee wearing men's uniform, there was a hem going right along the knee. So it's very important for the men to have the uniform fit, and in the same way it's important for the women. And the same story is with the men, because there are no very small sizes and very big sizes, very large sizes. But for women this problem is way more profound, because nothing was even developed for the women. For first month of the service, I was feeling like a rapper from Detroit, because my size is 36, and I was given the uniform of size 42. So you either don't wear winter uniform, so you have a choice. You are either you go in the field and you're freezing, or your pants look on you just like you're a Snoop Dogg. And those are the two biggest problems that remain in the official structure of the armed forces, which are only covered by the effort of the volunteers, are the medical matters and the clothing. And I was interested in tracking the matter of leadership in the armed forces too. There is a problem with the glass ceiling that we've heard about. It may sound cool on the level of documents. I was happy to see such paperwork, and at the same time I leave my office and I face the reality, because we have strategic sphere which is being governed by international conventions and legislation, and there is everyday life. When you feel yourself a plant, you're being asked very uncomfortable questions, like you're 30 and you're still not pregnant. I mean, I measure, being in the ground forces, I now measure this progress in everyday life, just taking part in combat operations. Fortunately or unfortunately, I was working for 3 years, my job in the headquarters, but now I'm a chief sergeant, I'm a master sergeant of my platoon. I go on the missions, and my measurement of the level of attitude to women, so you don't in the combat you don't go to the level of your expectations, but you go down to the level of your basic training. I could end up in the trenches and the commander could go elsewhere. So I know that fortunately in my company the attitude to the women is very good, but there is a higher level command above the company who comes and says, I will send you back to the rear because you seem to be afraid of something. I don't think you're smart enough for this service, and something like that. But no one asks the same questions, or no one says the same things to the men. After I've heard all of it, they told me that you have to show yourself not only in the front lines but in the kitchen too. All the women were in the mission. So not only in the front lines but in the kitchen too. We are hearing to all that thing. We cannot deny it because it's an officer, it's the commander, and there is a situation in the forward edge of the battle area, and it's not that command that goes there. Somehow it's me who goes there, and the same commander who was telling us we're not smart enough and your business is to deliver children, he sends his personal driver for me. So we go there, we fulfill the mission, and then I come back and I want to remind somebody that my job is to deliver children. You can finally punish me for fulfilling the combat mission. So to summarize it, we have some strategic things that, thanks God, we have progress in, and we can measure them. Fortunately, I was honored to be on service with the NATO armed forces as a civil consultant, and we can measure it. It's very convenient. There are systems that we have to learn in our armed forces, but in everyday life it's changing too. In combat operations, you see you're being relied upon, and this is the most valuable thing. Finally you're being treated as an equal one. But there is still a lot of work to do on both level of policy, strategy, advocacy, that is being mostly done by civil consultants. On the level of volunteer supplies, the girls, they do a tremendous job, and in everyday life there is still a lot to do, that we have to fight with. The war is going on in all fronts. Thank you very much for talking about the problems. It's utmostly important. Our meeting is important because there are those who are in the war, in the front lines, and those who represent civil organizations, because the civil organizations may be useful to you. They may help you in overcoming those problems. Oksana, you wanted to add something. I just wanted to add that the things you're talking about, they are not the rule, and I always call everyone, if there are any expressions like this, there are hotlines working. Everything that is being told in the hotline is being documented. If it's related to the gender matters in the ground forces, I will see it on my desk and I will take care of it. I will sort it out, and the advisors in every military unit, we have 142 advisors in the ground forces, and it works. I'm adherent to the policy of having all those documents to be implemented in practice. So it's not only on paper that there is one level here and another level here. I don't feel it in my work, and it's good you're saying about this. Many people say things like those. A lot depends on the commanders, in local commanders, and top level command supports it all, but army grew. A lot of new commanders have come who don't have either experience or competence. However, they are commanders, and they still have Soviet Union in their heads. They start saying the women's place is in the kitchen. If you talk just once to that commander, believe me, I had a couple of cases when I explained things like those to the men, and they just didn't understand what's going on. We have a problem about this. We have to communicate more things to the personnel. It's difficult to tell the personnel something, to communicate things during the war, but we try to do it on our level. And the advisors, I was talking to the unit commanders, they understand it too, and that work is being done. And we would like to get some active people involved in this communication, because sometimes it's enough to explain to a person, it's enough just to talk to them. I was concerned by that matter about the medicine, about the medical service, medical care, not only for advertising. We cooperate with the maternity home number 6. They provided their facilities for the military, for all the gynecological operations and deliverance of children. So that all those who serve in the ground forces, well, this maternity home is in Kyiv. It should be done in the regions too. So one aspect of my work that I was facing, believe me, now everybody works for the victory, and I'm only for this civil military cooperation to work in all fields, and that there are things like those you mentioned, but we have to document all of it, because the human being is the biggest value. And as to the uniform, there is a women's uniform being tested, but there are departments in the Ministry of Defense, and they are taking care of this matter of women's uniform. It's very good. It's being tested, and those in the women in the front lines, they are supplied with that uniform. I delivered that uniform personally to the girls in the front lines. If it's not enough, just send the application, send the request, and in this cooperation we're having with the volunteers, we can do it. Meanwhile, the ministry did not issue the uniform for everybody. I want every woman to have a normal women's uniform, but meanwhile we don't have it. We will be able to take it from the volunteers, and the same thing with the PPE, with the I appreciate the support of all the organizations that import it, who help us deliver it to Ukraine. Yes, we have to account the anatomy, and yes, Ms. Oksana, we can talk through these problems a lot. Well, you know, it's very good we're having this discussion today, because always meetings like these, they lead to the search of ways to proper solution. And as the government commissioner, I propose to have the meeting with the ground forces, women's movement. We will apply to the Ministry of Defense. We will get the Ukrainian Women's Foundation involved. We will get civil organizations involved. So let's structure all these questions, all these issues. It's good we're having a public discussion now, but it should move to the plane of solutions. And now that all the government offices and agencies, they propose their regional or industrial plans in 1325, all those issues should be included, but without lobbying, without advocacy from civil organizations, that process will not be as successful. So our cooperation is the fundamental for success. Right in our studio, the constructive discussion is being born. It's very inspiring. Miss Olesia, please, we understand that the subject of the military women is very important, but we understand there are civil women in war who are also affected by the war. Well, you know, I can't help but saying and mentioning something that was said before me. Well, Women's Foundation worked together with the Invisible Battalion when we started this research, and then there was a documentary, and we worked with Hanna to analyze the situation that was existing back then and the challenges that women are facing in war. And I'm happy to hear that we have good results, we have certain success, and I would like to also add to what Ms. Kateryna said. I would like to tell about the National Plan of Actions in 1325, how efficient it was worked through by the government agencies, in what way, and how coordinated it was. There was a complex approach by all the participants, all the parties involved, both civil society and the government, the state, and we have a positive result that is now in the lower level. There are regional plans of actions being developed, which are and all the matters we discuss now should be included in those plans. And I'm talking to Ukrainian veteran movement now. We ask your representatives to get involved to our regional coalitions. There are 14 regional coalitions which work on implementation of the regional plans of 1325, and we would like to bring up the issues which were included in the plans in regional level. So yes, I support your efforts. I support your inspiration to remember about the women who are not in the front lines but keep supporting the military in all ways possible, who bring our victory closer. We have to remember about the volunteers who got involved immediately as soon as the full-scale invasion has begun. They were providing support in all spheres. They were supporting the internally displaced persons, and they were supporting women and elderly and the kids, and they were helping with the supplies in the front lines, and they were providing medical assistance. So it's important to have this layer of the new leaders, women leaders who emerged during the war. We shouldn't let them go. We should be maintaining them. We should be supporting them after the war, so they can express themselves in political life, in the civil life. And now we're seeing the threat that there are a lot of talks in the civil organizations that the election law will be reviewed, and the census will be changed, and the women will not be able to participate in the political life, and it may affect the political life, the process of decision making in our country. And talking about civil organizations, the civil organizations play very important role from the very beginning of the war, but we have to also understand that they're facing many challenges, including how to work in new conditions and how to talk about financial stability, about burning out. There are many activists who face burning out during their work, just like Ukrainian Women's Fund. We're trying to increase their resilience to stress, to let the organizations take care of themselves, to take care of their teams, and to influence the changes in the society that are affected by them. Thank you, Ms. Hanna. Please join our conversation. Please take the microphone, and after that we will be able to answer the questions from the floor. So let's talk about civil organizations, their role and their support to our military and volunteers. Well, I represent the civil organization, the Invisible Battalion, and CIMIC is actually us. We work with the problems of the military women starting from 2015, and from 2018 we work with the women veterans. We have a coordinated cooperation. We have arranged cooperation with the government agencies and with the civil sector, with the activists. We are in contact with everybody who wants to work in that field, who wants to really implement changes, who is ready to help us, who is ready to talk to us, who is ready to tell us about their problems in the bottom layer. So we are the link that researches the problems, that studies the problems, and then advocates and finds solution to those problems. And my both professional and private opinion is that our fighters, both men and women, should be supplied with everything best, not only in terms of clothing. Nothing should be an obstacle for them to fulfill their duties. They should feel the most safe and comfortable, as safe as comfortable as possible. They should not be distracted by any problems with, say, their pants or some sexist comments. Those are all things that create minor obstacles for the women in their positions that the women are being distracted by during fulfillment of their combat duties. Those things should not be existing. It's our principal opinion, and we're gathering information about the existing problems, and we develop the recommendations, and we advocate the changes. We also do the gender education projects on the platform Prometheus. We made a course, a basic training course, gender equality and countering of the sexual harassment in the armed forces of Ukraine. There is information about what is sexism, discrimination, what are the international undertakings by Ukraine in the sphere of gender policy, what is sexual harassment, and what can be done in the workplace, what a commander should do, and stuff like that. So I invite everybody to get familiarized with that training course. I invite everybody to cooperation with us. I invite everybody to cooperate, everybody who is related to that problem and who wants to contribute to solutions. And if there are any questions on the floor, please go ahead, dear friends. Meanwhile, we're not having any questions. Let's proceed to our last speaker, Alyona. Alyona, you're a culturologist. Maybe you're seeing how, thanks to the culture projects, we can influence this subject. How can we bring enlightenment in this subject? Yes, thank you for your question. The cultural sphere is really still important. It remains very difficult. We're seeing a lot of culture events that are not related to modern events. They're not talking about gender equality, not talking about the war. There are still cultural centers working in Ukraine, or even the entertainment sphere. The culture is still important. Many cultural projects continue to talk about the war. They continue to talk about the gender discrimination. We understand that the war reinforces the existing problems, and it creates new challenges that we have to talk about, and that we cannot say that it's untimely, just like some may say about those holidays. The yesterday's draft law is one of the demonstrative examples that under the influence of war, under the cover of war, like the war is most urgent and everything else is untimely, they try to push through some ideas to create some new Ukrainian culture, as if everything that existed before is not urgent and we don't have to pay attention to it. And the same 8th of March, when we're try to withdraw from Soviet narratives, but we're just playing with ideology, and the war reinforces those problems. We see the activization of right radical movement, and that's a paradigm of violence, and the fact that the number of rapes growth, there is growth of domestic violence. We ratified Istanbul Convention. We think it should work, but in reality, there are no drastic changes since 2017, when the notion of raping and violence was defined, and it continues to influence culture today. Thank you. To summarize our conversation, I want to say that we have progressive changes. We keep talking about this. We feel all those changes. There are things to work on, and Nadia reminded us about this. There is a lot to work on. We have to talk through such problems, and thanks to consolidation of our efforts on the side of civil organizations and the government and our military and the representatives of these active leaders, the women, we can achieve success and progress. So thank you for this conversation. Thank you, dear journalists, for your interest in this topic. Bear with us, trust in our armed forces, and let's continue working on our victory. Glory to Ukraine.